Welcome to the Money and Mortgages podcast. I'm your host, Adam Coleman, accredited financial counselor and mortgage planner. Join me as I speak with fellow industry experts on all things personal finance. Welcome, everyone. This is your host, Adam Coleman, and with me today, I have returning to the show, Austin Coley. He's a certified financial planner with McCall Associates. Today, we're going to be digging a little bit more deeper into what they call the Cornerstone Process, which really is designed to get to the root of the financial planning, I think, goals and values and dreams of the clients to really fit get the math component, the financial component, but then also the dreams and the goals to figure out where everything kind of fits in. Austin, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, Adam, thanks for having me. I guess if you're having me back, the first one wasn't absolutely terrible. So I really enjoyed talking with you last time, and I'm excited to do it again.
Always a pleasure. Well, no, and I like the topic here just because I think we all tend to gravitate towards just planning mathematically of going, all right, I need to save as much as I can so I can retire, and then not sure what to do with it at that point. There's always kind of an awkward transition of accumulating and then, all right, what do we do with our life? And there's not really that conversation, I feel like, that a lot of people have to figure out, what are we doing this for? Like, what are our true goals? Like, what are we saving all this money to do? And I like the process that you're going to go through in more detail. So I'm curious to hear more. But I guess maybe jumping right in, like, give me your sense of what you think the Cornerstone process is, and why do you have that as part of your process with financial planning?
Yeah, thanks. I'll give you kind of the 30,000 foot overview here, and I'm sure we'll dive in deeper. And if you've listened to the first episode that I was on the podcast, it was on charitable giving, and this really kind of ties into that. Charitable giving, again, is one of my, if not my favorite parts of financial planning. And so really the root of it, Adam, came 2 or 3 years ago. So my wife works in marketing. She actually works across the street from me. I can hit a golf ball to her office. So
Nice.
people ask us all the time if we ride together and eat lunch. Rarely, we're
Right.
busy and have kids and all that. But anyway, they were doing a strategy session for a family who had a family foundation, so a pool of money that they were looking to give away to nonprofits, to charities. And so, but they had no real guardrails on who they were giving the money to. And so, people that they knew or leaders of organizations would come and ask them for grants, and they'd say, "Sure, I guess that sounds good. That cost sounds like it's helpful to the world. So we're going to, send a grant your way." So they wanted to get a lot more specific on what exactly they cared about so they could have more direction on who to give to. And so my wife, Chloe, her company walked them through this strategy session, and it was really cool. They had, sticky notes all over the whiteboard, really pointed questions were asked to the entire family. When I was able to sit in on this, and the outcome was a document. It was 1 or 2 pages long. And what it highlighted was the causes that they care about most, and also the organizations that they did not care to give to. So, a couple of examples. One is a Christian family. And so they decided that the causes that they gave to, they didn't necessarily have to be Christian organizations. They just didn't have to have anti-Christian beliefs. Okay, so that's something that they cared about. Two, they didn't want to be a primary donor for any organization. And so, they didn't want any organization to rely on them significantly. And so there's a bunch of other stuff that they left with, again, a framework when they were vetting charities, or had somebody that they knew in their network come and ask them for a grant, they could look back and say, does this align with who we are as a core, as a family unit? And if so, yes, let's figure out how to work this into our annual budget or make a one-time grant. And I left that thinking, wow, how useful was that for the family to all be in one room, have somebody facilitate a conversation and come out with a framework. And two, why don't we do something like that for our clients?
Right.
I think, do a wonderful job planning, but at the end of the day, you talked about kind of getting to the end of your working career, and not really knowing what to do with your assets. It's kind of like walking into, I always say money's a tool. That's a common analogy, but it's kind of like walking into Home Depot and just looking at tools. If you don't know what the project's all for, you'll come out with some good tools, but like, is it really going to fit with what you're trying to do? Odds are probably not. And so I took the framework that my wife's company used, tweaked it for what we do, And the outcome for our clients is an exercise that they're able to walk through. It's 5 questions, and the end goal is to, on one sheet of paper, come out with what they care about most, either as an individual or a family, what some of their goals are. And it can be financial goals or non-financial goals, and we'll get into
Right.
that. And then two, I guess finally at their core, if you strip everything down, like what matters most. And so that's helpful for us and for them on a couple of different areas. But we call it the cornerstone, just because if you go back to the olden days, but the cornerstone was the first block laid when you're building a structure, and all other blocks were laid in accordance to that first stone, that cornerstone. And so if we get this cornerstone right, if we can lay the first block correctly, all the other blocks of the house or the structure that are laid in accordance to that are going to fit, and we're going to be able to build the house we want. So my colleague Barry, who I work with, came up with the name, and I thought it was perfect. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what we do here through the Cornerstone process.
Nice. You mentioned the 5 questions. Is that something that you can quickly run through here?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So I'm not going to give away all the secrets, but I'll kind of walk through kind of what each question hits on. The first is, what values do you hold closest as an individual? And this is a very broad question. It can be a value, it can be a moral, it can be, something in your life, an activity. Basically, at your core, what matters most? I know we're going to get into some common questions. A lot of people put family here or faith here.
Right.
When you get to the root of who you are, what matters most. So that's kind of the first question. It's broad, and it's intentionally broad. I
Right.
want to give them the space to really explore whatever that means in their own life and be able to share that without kind of boundaries. So that's the first one. The second and third questions really are, what do you want to do in your life from a financial perspective and from a non-financial perspective? So
Hmm.
I always share, this could be, have a dream home. It could also be hike Mount Kilimanjaro. Like it's when you look out into the future, knowing that we can't know what's going to happen, the best we can analyze at this specific point in time, what do you want to do, either for yourself or for your family? So that's kind of questions 2 and 3. The final 2 questions help us shrink the time. And so the fourth question is, if you have 5 to 10 years left to live, how would your life look different? It kind of helps us, take away all the noise of where we're going in the next 40, 50, 60 years, however much time we have left, and distill it down into a short period of time where we have to prioritize what matters most to us. And then the final question is, if you only have one day left to live, what do you do? What did you miss? Again, the idea there is to put pressure on what matters most, so we can extract that for our team, for our planning purposes, but also for the client. Because lives are crazy. We've got all these ideas in our head of what we do, but very rarely do we take the time to actually flesh those out on paper and have somebody facilitate the conversations. But those are kind of the 5 questions. And we've got, again, markers on the whiteboard, sticky notes, stuff everywhere. We're really fleshing that out through follow-up questions and more questions and more questions. But at its core, those are kind of the 4 or 5 questions that we walk through.
Remind me, what sort of age range do your clients typically fall under?
Yeah, so I'd say our average client's right about 55, but
Okay.
we've got some clients that are in their early 20s, and some clients that are over 90. So it really is a broad range. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because the conversation is very different for somebody in my age range, as a younger professional, versus somebody that's in retirement years. For somebody in my age range, it's all about planning into the future for kids, and for, as we're in that accumulation phase, which we talked about in the first podcast. For somebody that's later in life, it's really a lot about legacy. You already have this
Yeah.
nest egg. We're not accumulating assets anymore. How do we want to leave it to children? Is there any causes that we want to support? Is there anything we want to do while we still have time left on this earth, to make a difference and be intentional in that way? So while the discussion is different with age ranges, we found it's just as valuable.
Let's do the most specific one, the 1 day to live. Like, can you think of any unique or unusual answers that you've gotten for that specific question?
Yeah, so it's funny. The answer I get most off is I would buy a lot more life insurance, which is, I always love that answer. But I tell you, the most unique answer I've gotten, we were walking with a couple who, lives a life here in Nashville. Their occupations are very just professional oriented. And the answer we got with that 1 day, I think this may have actually been the fourth question, was, man, I would move to Florida, I'd live by the beach, and I'd open a bakery. And
Interesting.
the husband said that. The wife looked at him like, "What did you just say?"
Has
Like,
she ever
I've
even heard that dream before at all in
never
her life?
heard that dream before. And so, and it's like he was realizing the dream like in real
Right.
time to be able to unpack that with that couple. And are they ever going to do that? Who knows? That's a conversation and an ongoing planning topic as far, also like what do they want to do? But just to even flesh that out, it's like if you strip out, the at that point, like kind of the money aspect of it, and what would you just do if you wanted
Right.
to live your life for full value? It was a really cool outcome to be able to talk through and really unpack with the client.
How different? I think I would assume the differences that you would see, not necessarily on that last question, but when you've got the 5 to 10 years left, like how do those answers differ so broadly between somebody at retirement age versus like a younger accumulator?
Yeah, yeah, great question. I mean, it's interesting. They differ some, but not a whole lot, because those in retirement, that's kind of the reality for a lot of people in that stage. They're already kind of living that. It's more real, right? And so they're able to really talk more about legacy, spending time with grandkids, prioritizing, seeing some of their wealth transition during that time period to see their kids and grandkids enjoy it. For accumulators, it's kind of twofold. One, if somebody has a family and they're the breadwinner, it really is like, how can I set my spouse up and our family up for financial success once I'm gone, make sure they're protected, get estate plans in place, like all of that stuff. But it's also like not care about the stuff that doesn't matter as much. Like, how can I spend time with my family and understanding that I've got a finite time left? And that's really true for all of us. Something can happen, Adam, to you or me today. And so how can we prioritize and continue to keep that thought in the back of our mind so we are constantly pushing for what matters most in our life?
You mentioned one example of it where the spouses were obviously not quite on the same page. Do you find that that happens pretty frequently where you have one person that has a completely different either value set or goal set versus the other spouse?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's what a common role that opposites attract and then eventually get married. And so I know that's true with me and my wife. And so we always run into spouses that might have different goals or objectives for themselves and for their families. And so I think it's important to distinguish, is it a goal for themselves, like as a person, or is it a goal for their family? If it's a goal for themselves, I think as spouses, we should be encouraged to let our significant other, pursue those goals, and how can we help them to feel fulfillment through achieving whatever that is. When it comes to like a family decision, gosh, that's an area where you need more time to really kind of unpack what's going to leave both sides fulfilled. There's not an answer, an outcome that usually happens during this cornerstone process, but it starts the conversation, right? There's a lot of things that, I think are left goals or dreams that are left unsaid because your spouse might not necessarily be on the same page for whatever that is. And so this cornerstone process, again, through a facilitator, which is myself, but really, a third person in the room and not talking directly to your spouse, but talking in this really safe format to be able to share that. A lot of
Right.
times it starts that conversation and eventually there's a compromise, right? That has to happen. You never want to do something as a family that's going to completely isolate one person into feeling like they don't have a voice. In all reality, this conversation, even though there might be a difference in opinion, I feel like both spouses leave feeling like they had a voice, as far as
Right.
an opinion on whatever that is. So it ends up actually usually being a very, very good thing.
Yeah, no, it's almost therapeutic at that point where you're just going through and having conversations that you just wouldn't naturally have without a third party involved a lot of times. So
Yeah,
the,
well,
the
let me step in because you said therapeutic, and I think that's an interesting thing that we need to talk about is like I'm a financial planner, right? Like you
right,
talked about the mathematics part of it. I love that. This conversation is very qualitative, right?
right,
There's nothing on the back end, yes, we do a lot of the planning, but these 2 or 3 hours that we're working through this cornerstone process, there's no math involved. It's all about, hey, let's dream it. Are we going to be able to do everything? Maybe, maybe not. But if it's not out there, then, we need to put it on paper if it's even an option.
right.
But through this, like you, especially when the values part of it, you do come across things that seem, especially through the follow-up questioning, that it seems more like a therapy or counseling session than it does sitting across from your financial advisor in a conference room talking about investment returns. And so
Right.
there is a line where, I always have to be careful of, is this out of my area of expertise as not a licensed therapist? And do, there, I believe therapy is a very, very good thing. And is there something that we're unpacking here that the client can, continue to unpack more with somebody that actually has a skill set to do that? And so that's an important distinction.
Do you tend to prioritize the goals in a different way when they do have different like joint goals versus singular goals? Like, does all that get included in? Because you kind of have like a one page, snapshot that you provide, I believe. Does that all get included, or do you more focus on the joint goals first and then maybe have like subsections for individual goals?
Yeah, so I lump everything together. And for those listening, if you'll go to our website, McCallandassociates.com, we've got a header called the Cornerstone Process that walks through this more and has a sample deliverable that you can look through. But I lump it all together because it's all important. As far as how we prioritize, it kind of falls into place naturally. A family goal, I think, is always going to have more weight than an individual goal, especially from a financial perspective. But at the same time, our individual pursuits are still important. And so I think it's important to lump all that together so one goal doesn't feel necessarily secondary. Once we get into the real planning parts of, how do we do this from a timeline perspective, from a cash flow perspective, I think that really enters the conversation of which goals do we attack first. But I think it's actually important to lump everything together. So one goal is not necessarily elevated.
Right. How do you almost quantify some of that? Like, because I know different people have different goals, and obviously there's different dollar figures associated with them. Do you ever run into situations where somebody's individual goal is much higher financial responsibility versus somebody else's? Like, how does that conversation end up happening? And is it happening in that call or that meeting, or is that happening just down the road?
Yeah, so that happens down the road. The actual decision on how we're going to attack this usually happens during a second meeting, which is a lot more quantitative. Once we understand exactly who a family or individual is at their core, know what they want to do, and we're actually putting the building blocks in place after the cornerstone to really make those goals a reality. That's really where that comes into play. But I think it's also a distinction between the goals and dreams and we're tweaking it to align to actually change to hopes and dreams. But the hopes or the goals are kind of near term.
Okay.
They're things that we can really do in the next 2 or 3 years. A lot of
Hmm.
times that's financial, but a lot of times it's not. Me and my wife have walked through this process as well. And one of my goals was to run a marathon. That's
Okay.
not a financial goal, but it's something that I wanted to do and I was going to do within the next 12 months. So we were able to prioritize that and one of my wife's was to get a promotion at work. So those are two individual goals, but we listed them in the goals or the hopes category. One of our goals is to have a dream home. That's down in the dreams category because that's not necessarily something that we see on the horizon the next 2 or 3 years. It's more longer term. And so that's kind of in that second subsection. On the bottom of the deliverable, I built out a timeline where we really kind of try to find a place for all the goals and the dreams. And that front end of the scale is usually heavier than the back end just because we're nearsighted individuals, like in general, but it's never static. It's always fluid and moving but we want to make sure to kind of list based on our forecast rather than on importance.
So I guess goals versus dreams are in your mind more kind of time bucket related, where it's just more like, all right, these are the things that I can do within the next few years. Dreams are longer term. Like, do you ever get into stuff that I wouldn't say pipe dream, but like something that's like way out of the realm of potential possibility, but at least to get some kind of idea of where their mindset is going? Does that get included somewhere, or is that just more a conversation topic that you get into to really try to find more tangible, realistic goals?
Yeah, we definitely do get, pipe dreams that people in their current financial state might not be able to do. And that's okay, right? Like if they can't do that, is there some sort of alternative that they can do to that might be
Right.
more financially responsible, right? And so again, my encouragement when people walk through this process is to put everything on the board because there's a chance we're not going to be able to do it all, and that's okay. But we need to at least be able to see everything they want to do so we can check off as many things as we can, right? And I've found that clients have said it's freeing to kind of list it up there and then be able to say, actually, we can't do it rather than kind of hold them tight and wishful too close to the chest, right?
Right.
So yeah, we try our best to list even those pipe dreams on the timeline, even if it's a tweaked version of the dream that the client might be better able to achieve. But as you know, financial circumstances change. Your life is going to look a lot different in 10 years than it does right now, Adam. And so keeping those things on the page allows us to revisit it if and when financial circumstances change through inheritance, the sale of a business, increase income or whatever it might be.
I know you provide like the one page, snapshot that kind of breaks everything down initially. How often are you revisiting that? Is it like an annual basis, quarterly basis? Like when do you kind of go back to it and see if revisions need to be made? Also to check off things to see if they're on track for some of those things.
Yeah, good question. So the one pager that we get, I think it's really beautifully designed, and we give it to them on cardstock along with a magnet. So the idea is to put it on your fridge.
Oh, nice.
That's the end goal. And so not only are you able to see it every single day when you go get milk or eggs or whatever? It's always front of mind of who you are at the core, who your family is at the core, and what you're trying to do. But also, as you go through the year and check off things, you grab a pen and you mark through it. You're able to actually tangibly cross off goals that you and your family had. We review it annually and or when life changes. Annually is a yes, things are going to tweak and move, over the course of a quarter of 6 months. But annually, we do our big kind of annual review once a year with clients. And so it's a good thing to bring out first and say, hey, this is what we walked through a year ago. This is what mattered most to you. These were some of the goals we had. What did we check off throughout the year and what's changed? Do you have any other dreams that have popped up, And what we found is that the values of the families that is very rarely changed, right? Who you are and what matters most stays pretty similar, throughout the years, but those goals and dreams change. We talked about like the accumulator versus the retiree. The retiree's goals are very different. They're usually focused on legacy, right? And so
Right.
as you move through it, the goals and dreams and the timeline will change. And being able to update that year to year helps the client, but also helps us from a planning perspective. But we found having a tangible piece of paper on the fridge throughout the year keeps clients on track and aligned.
Is there something electronic that you're also keeping, whether it's just for your side behind the scenes or for the client? Do you have that going behind the scenes as well, or is it more just kind of a separate, it's not really part of your planning software or anything, it's just kind of separate with a piece of paper, one page form that they have, or is it done differently?
No, so on our end, we kind of keep it at the forefront of all our planning that we're doing for them. It's not integrated into the planning software. We just keep it in our CRM and keep it kind of there at the top. So all decisions or planning or meetings that we have with the client, we look back at that first and remind ourselves of what's important and what they're really trying to achieve. Then that discussion runs a lot more smoothly. And all the decisions made in the planning software or estate planning recommendations or charitable giving strategies or whatever it might be all flows back through that sheet of paper. Think of it as like the funnel, right? That we
Right.
flow everything through.
So for the ones, obviously, like you said, some of them don't have monetary value or it's not like part of a financial equation. But for the ones that do, what does that typically look like? Are you building in like a financial goal and then they're saving incrementally towards that goal and then they can track that piece of it? Or does it really get that granular with you on some of these goals?
Yeah, so from a cash flow perspective, really it's trying to prioritize those goals onto what makes sense for a timeline for a client. Usually, I mean, you have kind of built-in timelines. So for instance, if somebody has a goal of paying for their child's private school education and the child's 2 years old, we can put that out 3 or 4 years from now that we're going to need to be in an
Right.
income spot to be able to pay for that. A lot of goals have kind of timelines built out. And for the ones that don't, we had a client that wanted to go visit Japan. They also wanted to go on a safari. Those were two vacation
Oh,
goals they
well,
had. And for us, it was looking at their cash flow and really asking probing questions about which one of these do you do first. For them, they've got kids that are, 10, 11, 12 years old. So they thought Japan would be better earlier on and then the safari later on, just from a
right.
experience standpoint. And so we were able to put that Japan goal first on the timeline and start saving, have a saving plan for that first, and then the safari plan later on. So really the timeline and how we attack each goal from a financial goal perspective is a combination of what matters most to the client, other objectives that they want to have, and then also is there kind of a built-in timeline that, like again for private school that we need to take into consideration.
Very cool. Well, no, I think this has been hugely valuable. I always like this stuff. Like, I think financial planning and personal finance always just ends up becoming too mathematic in some ways. And I think this goes beyond that and really gets to the crux of what we're doing all this for. So for anybody that doesn't have access to the Cornerstone process, do you have any suggestions or recommendations for somebody that doesn't have an advisor that'll go through this with them? Is there anything that they can be doing to try to kind of do some of this on their own to really just think differently about how and why they're saving money at this point?
Yeah, I mean, to go back to what you said at the beginning of that, I think, our real value that we bring as financial advisors, a lot of people think of financial advisors and think about, advisors that would sell stocks, be a stockbroker, right?
Right?
That's like the classic. And to be honest, like you can get pretty good investment management through some sort of like robo advisor. It
Sure.
might not be entirely efficient, but I know you have a lot of DIYers that listen to this podcast, and there's a lot of good softwares to get pretty good investment returns. I think the value that I bring and our team brings is really to extract value from other areas of life through planning. And so this is just a piece of that to be able to understand very clearly what a client is trying to achieve. And then we can bring in all the other aspects of the planning to align with that. And so if you don't have access to this and kind of want to go the DIY route, my encouragement would be to block off some time and spend some time journaling through those 5 questions. If you're married or have a spouse, significant other that you want to include in the discussion, what me and my wife did was just hired a babysitter, did one night away, and we paired a 2 or 3 hour long conversation around this stuff with like a nice dinner, right, and a staycation. And so
Nice.
kind of pairing this exercise with something fun, we found is very, very rewarding. And it's just about carving out the space to do it without distraction and being honest with yourself. If you put goals down that you think other people would like for you to do or the world wants you to do, you're not going to be happy at the end. So, really be honest with yourself and then set up a plan on how to check it off in a way that makes sense.
Perfect. No, I love all that. So if anybody, I know you mentioned your website, but just if anybody would like to learn more about this process and the work that you do, what's the best place to look?
Yeah, so again, www.mccallandassociates.com and spelled out A&D. That's a great way to look to understand the Cornerstone process. We're based in Nashville here. We do it here in office, but I've also done some via Zoom, and I think it's
Yep.
just as effective. So you can feel to reach out through that. Also, my email address is austin@mccallandassociates.com. I'm on the socials, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, all that. So just find a way to get in touch. I'd love to talk more and I'd be happy to do that.
I think this is great. Austin, I really appreciate taking the time to kind of run through this. So hopefully people get some value out of it and start thinking a little bit differently about what their goals are. I think it's great advice all around.
Good deal. Adam, thanks so much for having me again, man. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Austin.